And we are recording. Thank you very much. I'm happy to see you here with us today as we continue the study of grading for equity. Today we will get into the third pillar with our very capable hosts, Renee Doucette, Beth Carlson, and Angela Domina. And I am very happy to now turn over the responsibilities to them. Ladies, take it away.
You want to start, Angela?
Yep, I'm Angela Domina. I'm at Bangor High School. I teach English there, and I participated last summer in the book group, and I'm excited to facilitate. I'm working with Renee and Beth.
You want to go, Renee?
Beth, I'm going to share about the other elements.
Okay, so I'll go next.
Yep.
I'm Beth Carlson. I teach at Kennebunk High School, also English. I participated in the summer book group as well, and have definitely changed some of my practices this year based on things that resonated with me and that I felt were doable within the framework of Kennebunk.
All right, and I'm Renee Doucette. I also teach at Kennebunk High School, and Beth is in the classroom next door to me right now at this exact moment. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about our plan and our intention for these two sessions related to Pillar 3, focusing on motivation based on Joe Feldman's grading for equity. So first and foremost, our intention is to be able to share our work as what we are calling ourselves as studying practitioners of grading for equity. So we did our summer study and then, set some intentions for what we wanted to do with this school year. And so now that we are, holy cow, really far into the school year, more than halfway at this point, we are sharing our expertise by application. So understanding that we've studied, we've practiced, and then we've likely done some reflection and revising as we go. We've each decided to focus on a different chapter for sharing that expertise. So Angela is going to be talking about chapter 11, specifically, I think, focusing on the idea of some redos and retakes. I'm going to talk about chapter 12, thinking about rubrics and really focusing on transparency and clarity for students as we give them grades in the grade book. And then at our next meeting, Beth is going to be talking about chapter 13 and a lot of self-reflective activities that she's done with her students to work on some of those soft skills. And our plan, go to the next slide, for today's session is we're going to split the time up into chapter 11 and chapter 12. We're going to start with one of us focusing on a presentation of key ideas from the chapter. And those are really ideas in practice rather than a restatement of what the chapter was particularly about. You'll also see that we're going to split into 3 breakout groups, and each of us are going to facilitate one of the conversations in that breakout group. And the breakout groups are going to be 25 minutes long. So our intention is to really let you guys settle in to the conversations, to use the 3 of us as like facilitators in the truest sense that we want to support and guide your thinking. And then we're going to close out each chapter with just a quick parting thought from whoever was the facilitator from that chapter. And for our breakout groups, our focus questions, for breakout groups are going to be the same for every chapter. And we thought about writing questions that were specific to each chapter, but then we thought, like, what's the goal here? And really, we want to have critical conversations about what resonated with folks, what challenged their thinking. We know there's a lot that's hard to grapple with that pushes back against some of those practices that we've had in the past. And then also be able to think about implementing this into our practice and what that might look like in practical terms. And so really providing us with the freedom and flexibility to have the conversations lead organically wherever each group sees fit based on their needs. So without further ado, Angela.
Thanks, Renee. Yeah, and I think it's crucial that that we look at, we are at the end of the book and bringing back all of the pieces that we've set in philosophy and Joe Feldman's thinking and the context. And sort of the 11, 12, and 13 are like, okay, what are the tools and how does this actually look in application, as Renee said. So chapter 11, we start out with practices that support hope and a growth mindset. And he centers each chapter on a driving principle. For chapter 11, the quote, the way we grade should motivate students to achieve academic success, support a growth mindset, and give opportunities for redemption. So everything that we offer is about giving students a chance to succeed. So a lot of I'm just pulling out a couple of pieces from the literature and the behavioral research about expected rewards, how that can actually decrease interest, and that tangible rewards have actually a negative impact on motivation. And so what we think about is just this lovely graphic of the giant red F, failing grades. What student do you know who has been motivated by a failing grade? And so the biggest takeaway, I think, as our springboard for tonight is that failing grades do not motivate students. And we want to try to find ways to build that confidence so that students don't lose the confidence that their success is actually possible. And as some of the mathematical pillar talks about, heavily weighting toward a failing grade doesn't give kids a chance to actually overcome that to be successful. So just breaking down the extrinsic rewards versus intrinsic, and on the left-hand side, giving grades as an extrinsic reward. Those things encourage productivity for formulaic tasks. They actually lower performance overall. They may increase unethical behavior, as we talked about, i.e. cheating. Place focus on short-term goals. What do I have to do to get an A, or whatever the passing is? So that is where we want to hopefully take a departure from and move toward intrinsic rewards, and getting students to think about deep and expansive and complex thinking, to focus on their learning, to focus on creativity, originality, and essentially to create their own success. And those sorts of aligning intrinsic ideas allows for alternative possibilities of learning. Feldman highlights the coping mechanisms that students use if they are failing. Their external behaviors may suggest disinterest and dismissal of their low grade. We might say, oh, they don't care. A coping mechanism to protect themselves from profound fear and self-doubt. I think a lot of the psychology is that all students actually want to be successful. So fear of failure can also drive students to search for other sources of self-worth. They may reject school altogether. Who among us have had a reluctant learner or disenfranchised student? They might make a student excuses for their failure, or focus on other ways to find and define their own success. And that might be outside of academics, extracurriculars, activities, sports, or social groups. So we come back to the center of the question: why do we grade students? What is the goal? How do we assess and grade students? And so is our goal the grades themselves? Historically, traditionally, Patty set us off at the start of the book study with sorting students. Feldman explores where grades came from. And so students ask, what do I need to get an A? What do I have to do to pass? What's the minimum? And they're just looking at items to check off. I hope that we are moving more toward the goal of actual student learning. A lot of the work in research about how do we focus students on self-efficacy, endless capacity, and hope. And that's what Feldman gives us as our sort of triangle for motivation and hope with our students. So it becomes our moral imperative, of course, to stop using grades as punishment. We've talked a lot about that. And instead to reframe and re-employ them to give more students a set of self-efficacy, endless capacity, and hope. So everyone just plant yourself in those 3 words. So some key ideas, this is all just a quick recap, and this will be a springboard for our conversation and breakout, that we can come back to these ideas and process who among us has tried things and what works, and how we can see how to implement these practices. So takeaway: equitable grades motivate. Grades are a temporary description of a level of mastery in a subject. not a static definition of who a student is. We want to dispel that idea that, oh, he's a B student or she's a D student, or I'm an A student. So how do we focus on mastery? Grading practices can dislodge students from those fixed mindsets and can actually ensure success is always attainable. Mistakes are important and necessary for learning. I think whenever we have the conversation about what we do as teaching skills and we focus on the skills, we can make easy comparisons to learning a sport, learning an instrument, learning any task that we all learn through making mistakes. And so we'll revisit that idea. And then the mathematical likelihood of success wanes and resilience is drained. As soon as a student feels that there's not a chance for them to succeed, why should they bother? Why should they come to school? Why should they try? Why should they study? So we want to look at how to switch what we're doing into building that resilience and teaching them that their efforts actually bring about success. And that no matter where students start at the beginning of the year or when they transfer in, no matter what has preceded and how many times they fail, that success is still possible for them. And so we want to center our conversation tonight about how we can actually show students that they can earn that success. Couple of practices that he gives us 3 in chapter 11. So minimum grading. Again, a lot of people I think are already starting this or thinking about this. Some schools have moved to 60% lowest grade possible to make earning a passing grade achievable with the equal proportion. That offers the opportunity for redemption, and it's not inflation, but rather it restores mathematical accuracy to our gradings. And then renaming grades, descriptors, exceeding, meeting, approaching. And this automatically says that we are all moving on a continuum. And that sends the message that their success is more possible. And the third piece for tonight is the retakes and redos, that they actually motivate students to keep learning, to fix their mistakes, to try again. The student is in the learning progression. It defines formative versus summative. And the question of how do we use our end of unit exam? Do they use that as a learning tool to improve and prepare for the next summative exam? Focus on teaching students how to analyze their own errors and reflect on their mistakes and make corrections to guide their learning and moving forward. It's not just one and done, moving on. And that retakes and redos must be mandatory. And this is a crucial point that Feldman gives us, that in order to bolster confidence and reaffirm high expectations, we all know that certain students historically who want the chance to get a higher grade are often our highest performing students. And we want to focus on giving equitable chance for everybody to improve their performance. So I took one piece out of something I had tried this year, and I had committed to the mandatory redos. And this is from a record that I had made on the side of how I tracked progress for first semester on 2 different subunits. And so I'm going to show you parts of speech. I did a pre-test in September and then a post-test in December after several weeks of working with the text and having students retake. And so I actually had the philosophy that retakes are mandatory until they get 100%, that they get that true mastery. And so the goal is 100. So parts of speech pretest, this student A got 3 out of 22 on the pretest, and on the post-test, 18 out of 22. You can see that I tracked his parts of speech quiz number 1, number 2, number 3, and then he didn't take a number 4, but his final assessment was 18. The second student started at a 0 and went to 16 by the end of the unit, and the third student 2 and went to a 22 out of 22% out of 22. So you can see that different students need different amount of retakes or redos until they get that 100. And this becomes, a level of keeping track. And I just created a table that I was able to enter their scores in pretty quickly. I did the same thing for fiction terminology. So a student moved from 11 to 34, 8 to 34, and 11 to 34. And you can see that several students were able to make that 100% on the first or second try, and some took 4 tries and some didn't take it. So there's a lot of ways to look at this, and I'm curious to see different ways that different people have tried. But we are going to move toward our breakout session with all of that review of chapter 11 and the strategies suggested. We're going to focus our conversations in our three groups about what resonates with you in this chapter and what challenges you're thinking. What questions do you want to gnaw on? And what do you envision personally implementing into your practice? Maybe you can try something the remainder of this year. Try it on one unit or try it with a certain class. And what might that look like? And we're going to process how to move into that. So that brings us to the end of the presentation for chapter 11 and back to Morgan. And if there are any questions, this would be a good time. But Morgan, I think, is going to send us into breakout rooms. And you can see that I've put in the chat the link to the slideshow so that you can each access that if you like.
Great. And I will, once you get into your rooms, I will post the questions again, although I know you each have them. Okay. So
All right, so I'm going to be talking about chapter 12 and practices that lift the veil. The driving principle here, the way that we grade should be so transparent and understandable that every student can know their grade at any time and know how to get the grade that they want. We did put the link to this presentation in the chat earlier, and especially in my portion of the presentation and the part that Beth is going to share next week, I've got links to documents that you guys are absolutely welcome to peruse. They're just examples. They're not like magic or anything, but anyway, so thank you, Morgan, for putting that in there again. So I just went through and identified some kind of key highlights that I had left in my book for chapter 12. So this was the focus, the motivation pillar was the focus of my summer study. And I spent a ton of time processing this at the beginning of the year, especially. And I really honed in on my practice that's now become much more automatic. At the beginning, it was really hard to process through these ideas. And now it's just becoming part of, like, when I'm starting a new unit, what are the skills and how do I lift the veil for my students? So for that first quote, focusing on skills and ensuring that I recognize those skills alongside my students has been really important, that students understand what learning actually looks like. And one of the things that came out of our last group's meeting is that one of our goals is to change kids' mindsets. So that was one of the takeaways from our presentation, or our small group, was that it's okay to make mistakes and we need to help students understand that through our grading practices. And then that second quote there, aligning the rubric more closely with my instruction, is something that I've been working on this year, especially making sure that students understand the rubric and how it's going to be used as well. And then that last quote, how to tie grades more directly to the learning itself rather than other factors that Feldman would tell us should not be included in the grade. So those effort scores, those things that are related to inequitable access that students may have to things outside of school. And then, of course, those bias-based practices that have been more prevalent in education historically. All right, next slide. So this quote has kind of guided all of my work for lifting the veil. So grading is most motivational when the targets for academic success are clear, don't move, and the path to hitting those targets are explicit for all. So my entire focus of my work this year has really been lifting the veil for kids as much as I possibly can and being as clear and transparent with my instruction and with my assessment and what students need to do to be successful. So I spent a lot more time focusing on the skills themselves. And that meant that at the beginning of every unit that I've started in all of my classes this year, I've identified which skills are going to be assessed in this unit. Sometimes I'll identify we have been working on these skills in the past and these are the skills we're moving on to, or this is how this unit builds on the skills that we previously discussed, which are all things that I thought about in the past, but weren't things that I made transparent to students. Second is that the direct instruction is focused on those skills. So if I tell students we're working on transitions, at the end of the unit, that's what's assessed. We're going to be working on transitions every day, a little bit in some way, shape, or form. Multiple formative practice opportunities have also been a major piece of lifting the veil this year for me and my students. So practice opportunities use that gradual release of responsibility model. And really, I work on kind of initial practice that really is just based on feedback and formative information for me. And then multiple practice opportunities using the rubric so that students have the opportunity to get the rubric in advance and see where they land on the rubric in a formative way. And I've linked in the presentation here the rubric for rubrics that Feldman references that you guys are welcome to click on and peruse as well. I also put formative scores in the gradebook, but I mark them as exempt to track growth and progress. And I really love the ability to be able to look at a student's formative scores. And I put those in as the 1 through 4 rubric scores. And I put them in as exempt so that I can see them, the students can see them, but there's no numeric impact. And then I also give students what I call instructional feedback. And I give a lot of individual feedback to students as writers and readers, but I also do a lot of what I call collective feedback, where I talk about overall as a class, where are we as learners? And then we use that information to set individual and class-wide goals for our learning. So on the bottom of that slide there, I've got an AP literature example that is kind of absurd, but it's like 2 pages worth of, you know, what did we do well? What are we struggling with? And then here are some ways instructionally that we could move forward. And then the second example is how I take that concept and modify it for a group of learners who struggle more than my AP students do. And that has to do with an end of unit work that we were doing with analyzing elements of the things they carried. And I identified where are we doing well? What's the thing that we still need to work on? And then I gave students an activity where they did a revision of some work that they were already in process with so that they could see what they needed to grow on. And then they immediately had the opportunity to demonstrate that growth before we did any sort of summative work. Next slide. Is that the next slide? Hold on, can you go back? That one, yes, sorry. One more forward. The one that says summative attempts to lift the veil. There, yeah, thanks. So for summative assessments, we start summatives by reviewing feedback and setting goals every single time. So I do pre-assessment work specifically where I'll ask students to look back at all of the feedback that I've given them on a specific skill set. So for example, when we read Macbeth, we were really focusing on analyzing figurative language and analyzing theme. And so on that pre-assessment reflection that's linked there, you would be able to see, you know, the directions that I gave students, identifying their strengths, identifying their needs for improvement or their goals for the assessment, and then being able to break down what that will look like and what supports they need from me as they get ready to move into that next step of their work. And then students also, I've been doing separate scores in the gradebook for each skill rather than averaging scores. So as a teacher of English, kids used to get like a B on an essay. I'm like, what on earth is a B? I don't know the answer to that particularly. And so students on the Kite Runner assessment, for example, the 3 skills we were working on was crafting an argumentative analytical, you know, literary thesis statement ultimately, and then identifying and choosing best evidence and then analyzing evidence through the lens of character. And so those 3 things went into the gradebook as separate scores. So 3 summative scores that students earned, which made those things feel bigger to kids actually than an actual essay because they saw it in there 3 times. So that's how I went about. The computer still averages it, but I didn't average it. And now the kids know exactly what they did well and the areas where they need to work on for the future. As far as nuts and bolts are concerned, I think this is the thing that it comes down to most. And for assessments, I use words. We talked about renaming grades, you know, exceeds, meets, partially meets, not yet meeting, to describe the development of skills. So I, yes, may give a student a 3 on the rubric out of 4, but then I will also tell them you are currently meeting the standard. And then I give them an explanation as to what that looks like. 1 through 4 goes into the gradebook for formatives. Sometimes those formatives do receive grades. So I might give kids 2 practice opportunities without a grade, and then 1 practice opportunity that is graded as a formative score before the summative. So they get the opportunity to demonstrate some of that growth. And then also, I work at Kennebunk High School. We are a very traditional school, and we use a 0 to 100 scale. So I've made a translation score document. It is not beautiful and it is not perfect, but I've really struggled to be able to say, like, if you are exceeding the standard, what numeric score is that? And the way that I've decided to do it is to do, like a 4 is an A. And, is that the best way to do it? I don't know, but a 50 is my minimum grade. So at least it creates a little bit of a cushion there for students. So I wanted to share that translation document with you just so that you could see how I do it. And if you have a better way that you've tried or a better way that has worked for you, I would be very interested to hear about it as well. But this is where I've landed this year, just because I have to give a 0 to 100 score for my work. And if I put a 4 in and points, and they get a 3 out of 4, it automatically turns it into a 75, and that is just not something that I like. So we've tried to get Power School to do something different for us, and we haven't quite figured it out yet. So ultimately, as I think about wrapping this up, the process for me has taken a lot of time, and what it comes down to is that this has actually led me to rethink more so my instructional practices almost equally to my assessment practices. There's still room to grow and study, and I'm really looking forward to breakout group conversations related to Chapter 12. So we'll get ready to move into those now, I think.
Okay, if you're ready, here you go again.
Bye.
And take it away.
So Beth, Renee, I don't know, we have just 10 minutes left in this session, and I'm not sure if you want to highlight any big takeaways, any thoughts from your sessions, or anything for people to think about as they're going into next week. Or if any participant wants to say anything that you really loved. I know a few people got really excited in some of the conversations about things they want to try and things that they're thinking about differently. Maybe we want to just take a couple of minutes for highlights.
I would like to kind of make a challenge to people being an ELL teacher to write any rubrics or grading standards you're giving kids in a kid-friendly, easily accessible language so that it can help all students. Even if they're high level, they'll still understand it, but it will also help your low level ELLs to understand what they can do and maybe how they can move forward. So I would like to kind of challenge you to think about that as you move on to next week.
Beth, you're muted. Were you talking?
God, the mute button gets me every single time. I was just saying, does someone from my group have something that they want to share out, a takeaway from the discussions? No. So one of the things that we found challenging was finding time to do this, finding time to rewrite rubrics, or finding time to really reorganize the way that we track assessments. And that, so we talked a little bit about that. There was a lot that resonated. Renaming grades. Oh, we were saying instead of not yet meets, calling something entering the standard, rather than not yet meeting it. You're just starting.
We spent some time talking about getting students to score other people's work and their own work using rubrics, and then setting an intention of working on more consistently developing and sharing rubrics with students and making that process more streamlined so that it's more consistently happening. And Jessica, I appreciate your nod to kid-friendly language as well. So thinking about how are we presenting that information and ensuring that our students are able to access it equitably. Angela, anything from your group?
Yeah, we had some really great discussions, also mulling over a couple of takeaways that students really want to be successful. Every student wants to be successful. And I think our challenge is to revision how we send a message to students and allow them to know that we are going to support them in being successful. And I think the way we grade and assess and a score carries that message of some people in the group shared, like, I'm actually going to treat every student as though they can be successful and they can learn. And that's an active, deliberate choice that a teacher decides, and then a message that they send that says, I am going to invest everything that I can to help you to be successful. And when we expect them to be successful, I mean, that's Ed Psych 101, where we expect them to be is where they will be. And we talked about the challenge of being like kind of like the lone teacher, trying practices that are aligned to equity, and the need for people to bounce ideas off of like-minded individuals next door, or there's a colleague in the building, or there's someone to wrestle with these things, because as teachers, we have so much power over what we do for the students on our roster, right? So I'd love to hear other thoughts about, just it's easy to say there are all these things stacked up against students or against teachers or in a time of COVID, and it's easy to sort of like list the challenges or the barriers or the obstacles, but really to return to that question of what can I actually do on behalf of my students? I think that's really empowering. Any other thoughts from any participants? I really love the 25 minutes sessions with people. That was a good way to sort of dig into some things. So thank you all. Seeing nothing else, I'll just say for next week, everyone's reading chapter 13, and the same sort of anticipation of, what stands out to you, what challenges you, and really the second half of next week will be about beginning to list something. What are you willing to try? What do you make a commitment to? And I know Morgan's going to take us into that in the big picture at our last session. But any other thoughts, Renee or Beth, on preparation or anything else?
I don't think so. I liked Angela just thinking about what you can do for a kid. We talked a little bit about maybe bending the rules a little bit with a kid, and making that kid feel like it's achievable, even if you're doing things a little bit differently than you do with everyone else, and just making it seem achievable.
Thank
Renee?
you. Morgan, I think we're all set with wrapping it up. What is anyone else?
So you've got your ideas of what to do for next week, and I put the feedback form link. I fixed it. Sorry, it was closed, and I opened it. And you get your contact hours from completing that form. So I think we're good to go. I just want to remind you that we'll look at chapter 13 next Thursday, same place, same time. It's actually the same link, but I'll still send it out to you to remind you. And we'll see you Thursday at 3:30. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Hi, thank you.
Take care.
I agree with Bree. Great job, ladies.
Thank you.
Yes, good work. Thank you. It was nice having a moderator in the breakout room. Good idea.
Yes, it's great to hear from everybody. And I really feel like the 25 minutes was helpful. We talked about that in planning, that you just want to